Hello, this is Sam Simon, also known as Dementia Man, for June 16, 2024, Founders Day. So, my blog for this week and for today is going to be a little bit about my father. It's in the play, and two parts of that, though. So, listen to the whole thing. Just a little bit about who I am and where I came and my father, but also the connection between my father and my Alzheimer's disease. Stay tuned. So, in the play itself, Dementia Man, right, pretty within the first minute, I start talking about my journey, how remarkable my journey has been. I'm talking about my father, Marcus Simon. No, my son's name is Marcus Simon. We'll get to that later. But Marcus Simon, my dad, born in St. Louis, and he was a traveling salesman. You have to have seen Death of a Salesman, where the main character in that play was a guy by the name of Willie Loman. So in the play, I say my dad was a traveling salesman. Think of Willie Loman. Well, real quick, my dad would sold children's and infants wear as he drove around Southwest United States. We lived in El Paso, Texas, and he would take out the back seat of his Chevrolet and fill that back seat with black suitcases that were bound by a strap filled with children's and infant wear samples. And he would go to places like Silver City, New Mexico, Deming, New Mexico. Arizona was Phoenix and Tucson. That's how I got to see the Grand Canyon because he sold, and this was the late 50s, mid 50s even, where he would drive up to the Grand Canyon and sell children's and infants wear to the store inside the main or the only building at the Grand Canyon where you would walk in and perhaps get tickets, souvenirs. And I was with him one summer, and that's the first time as a kid I saw that gigantic, amazing place, Flagstaff, Arizona. Also, he sold onto the Indian reservations in northern Arizona. Great experiences, and along the border, Douglas, Arizona, I forget all the border cities, into Las Vegas, Nevada, and then into Southern California, even across the border into Tijuana and southern Mexico. Now, I describe him as Willie Loman. In the story of Death of a Salesman, Willie Loman owned a clothing company. He did wholesale. He was a wholesaler and just what my dad did. And when he lost his company, Willie Loman killed himself. Now, my dad had a somewhat similar experience in that it was a surprise. Willie Loman's all of a sudden wasn't in charge of his company. His son bought it and his son fired him. Well, my dad worked for the same man in El Paso for 30 years. And when that person sold the company to another owner, my dad walked into work one day and the new owner said, well, I made a mistake. I paid too much for this company. I didn't understand that the brands weren't exclusive and I need to let you go. Period. End of work. Been there 30 years, had no pension, had no health care. And it was a devastating event. My dad went on to become a manager of a service station, but I don't think he ever recovered. And he died much too young. He had been ill. He was a heavy smoker, and he was 63 when he passed away from uh, really a combination of kidney disease and other ailments. He was a really bright guy. He loved to read the encyclopedia, and he had been a wrestler as a kid, and he spent a lot of time trying to get me to be athletic. Skinny Sam, who was that 120-pound weakling as he grew up, a frustration to him sometimes. But his name was Marcus, and he passed away before we had children. So in the Jewish tradition, it is typical that you name your children after a relative, someone who is no longer alive. And when our first child was a boy, we decided to name him after my father, Marcus. And my son is a state legislator in Virginia, and a successful businessman as well, and has done my father's name proud. There's another thing about my dad, though. I don't know if my dad was at risk himself for Alzheimer's, but I do, of course, have Alzheimer's disease, and I have a genetic risk, and that's called an APOE4 gene. These are the genes that coincide, that create a variation on an APOE gene, and they have variations on it. The 4 means that you are almost 50% higher risk for contracting the disease. So I found out that I had an APOE4 gene because I did 23andMe. And I did it very early on, and it was part of their basic package. And I don't know, maybe more than a decade ago. And I got the results, and it told me who my relatives were. And then it had these 2 little things. You have 1 instance of APOE4, and you are slightly higher risk for Alzheimer's. Then I have another genetic risk. I'm also somewhat higher risk for Parkinson's. It just went boom. I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't know anything about it. I felt fine. Well, now that I have it, I began looking for my family history, where that gene might come from. And I have found out that it is from my father's mother's side of our family. She was born a blonder. And as I went through all these I've done Ancestry and 23andMe, and I know there's other ones I've done. I found the Blonder family history, Blonders that are still alive, a whole part of that family. And Alzheimer's is very prevalent in that part of the family. So that's my understanding. They're wonderful people. They, at the same time, have gone through several of their family members with Alzheimer's. I've not seen it on my mother's side of the family, and she had a larger family. My dad had 2 siblings. My mother had 6 siblings, so double the number, and it was never prevalent in their side of the family, either in generations before us or since then. So, in the spirit of National Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, I also want to spend just a minute or 2 talking about the importance of early diagnosis and getting tested to see what your risk profile is. And I urge you to do that. I hear it over and over, though, from some people. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Well, there are lifestyle and medicines and drug trials that people can get in early on. And there are new drugs that are coming out. One just approved this past 2 weeks that will slow down the disease. There was also an article in the paper where some scientists now believe if you have 2 instances of that APOE4, I have one side of the family, but many people have 2. And this new report said that you should be treated as if you had the disease if you have two instances of the APOA4. So how do you get tested? Well, I did 23andMe. It's still an option. Now, these testing people have figured out how to make more money. And while I started with the basic 23andMe at $99, I think to get the full testing is going to be about $140. I just did some search on the internet, and there is some folks out there who want to charge you $400 for a package. I'm not saying no, but it feels higher. There's some good resources, again, about finding about your options, why you should do it, how to do it. I will put in below a link for the Alzheimer's Association page about getting genetic testing. And of course, as I've said in previous, my last few blogs, Alzheimer's.gov has some great suggestions on that. And also, the NIH has some suggestions on how to get some genetic testing. So if you're worried about it, if you're aware of cognitive decline in your family and the possibility of Alzheimer's, it is important to get tested early. There are more drugs that are helpful if they're taken early, and you'll know your risk profile and can plan appropriately and decide to start volunteering early. And please, please volunteer for drug trials. You too can help end Alzheimer's by being a person who goes into testing, helps in the science of study, and finally bringing an end to this disease. So that's my Father's Day note and continued focus on Alzheimer and health awareness, and wishing you joy with your fathers or the memory of your fathers or being a father. My last point said there was something special about my son and my journey. So my dad died when I was 25 years old. Now, when my son, who's now 54 or about to turn 54 at the end of this month, turned 50, I realized I had no idea what it'd be like to be a father to a 50-year-old. I didn't have a father then. So I took my son to lunch and said, Marcus, I need some help. I need you to help me be a father to a 50-plus-year-old son. So far, we're doing great. We're going to go out for lunch with him, and our daughter's in a different city, but I'm glad to be a father to a daughter who's 50-plus years old. Yeah, anyway. Happy Father's Day to the fathers and sons and daughters. Take your dad out for something special and tell him you love him. Show him you love him.